In the year 208 AD, along the muddy banks of the majestic Yangtze River, history was poised to witness the largest naval armada ever assembled in China. The fleet stretched across the water like a floating city of ominous intent, a harbinger of death and destruction. An audacious commander boasted that 800,000 soldiers stood packed aboard, vessels that groaned and creaked under the immense weight of steel and ambition. Leading this formidable force was Cao Cao, the most feared warlord of his era, a man whose relentless rise to power had left a trail of vanquished rivals in his wake. With keen, predatory eyes, he gazed southward, hungering for conquest of the last fragments of China, yet ungripped by his iron hand. But the dark waters awaiting him did not promise glory. Instead, they were set to engulf his aspirations in a searing blaze of defeat, forever altering the trajectory of Chinese history. The autumn of 208 found the Middle Kingdom in turmoil, a land afflicted by chaos and strife. For nearly 4 centuries, the Han dynasty had flourished, its reign over the sprawling territory now reduced to a crumbling facade, reminiscent of a house built on shifting sands. The Emperor Shan, a mere puppet perched upon his gilded throne, watched helplessly as warlords descended like vultures, feasting on the remnants of his once mighty empire. The Yellow Turban Rebellion had shattered the dynasty's hold on power, leaving a fractured realm where brute force prevailed and the strong took what they willed. This disarray emerged men driven by insatiable ambition. Cao Cao was not born to rule, but he had taken the reins of power with tenacity and resolve, absolutely refusing to relinquish them. By 200 AD, he had delivered a catastrophic defeat to his most formidable rival, Yuan Shao, on the blood-soaked fields of Guandu, solidifying his claim over the northern plains with brute force. This decisive victory, marked by sheer devastation, announced to the entirety of China that a new master had risen from the ashes of the vanquished. Yet Cao Cao was not satisfied with ruling only half an empire. The southern territories persisted in their defiance, fortified by the natural barrier of the Yangtze River and governed by formidable warlords who dared to believe they could withstand his might. Liu Bei, a scion of the imperial lineage, sought legitimacy through his royal blood, while son Quan, the lord of the affluent southern lands, had managed to evade his grasp. But Cao Cao's ambitions would soon challenge this status quo. In the winter of 2-7, Cao Cao secured the northern frontier through a swift and brutal campaign against the Wuhu clan at White Wolf Mountain. It's a display of military cunning so effective that it left his enemies shaken and disoriented. Upon returning to his capital city of V, he orchestrated his own ascent to power, convincing the emperor to appoint him as chancellor, effectively consolidating control over the imperial apparatus. The young emperor became a prisoner in all but name, shackled to the will of his ambitious chancellor. With this strategic peace in place, Cao Cao set his sights southward, crafting an audacious plan that defied the norms of warfare. Where previous military campaigns had relied on the tried and true methods of cavalry and infantry across familiar northern plains, this endeavor would be different. Unlike static land routes, the Yangtze River was not merely an obstacle. It served as a vital highway for transporting his armies deep into hostile territories. Seizing control of the occupied naval port of Jiangling, Cao Cao acquired a fleet of river vessels, initiating one of the most remarkable military transformations in ancient warfare. His seasoned soldiers, battle-hardened on dry land, were now thrust into the role of marines. The sight was nothing short of extraordinary. Hundreds of thousands of men accustomed to the pounding of hooves and the clash of swords on firm ground found themselves packed onto swaying wooden decks, buckling beneath the surging waves. These men may not have been trained sailors, but they were conquerors, stepping into the fray burdened with more than just weaponry. They bore the weight of Cao Cao's fierce conviction in his destiny. He had never tasted true defeat during critical moments, and he saw no reason why the southern waters should prove any different from the familiar northern plains. However, beneath the surface of this colossal endeavor, fissures began to appear. The northern soldiers, raised in the parched climate of the central plains, grappled with seasickness retching over the sides of their vessels. Tropical diseases carried by the humid air of the south started to spread within the cramped quarters of the fleet. What had appeared as a stroke of military genius began manifesting serious flaws, fraught with dangers that even the most strategic mind could not fully anticipate. Meanwhile, in the south, desperate preparations unfolded. Liu Bei, taken aback by the sheer speed of Cao Cao's advance, struggled to rally his scattered forces, his territories overrun in the initial assault. Only through the astute maneuvering of his chief strategist, Zhuge Liang, did Liu Bei manage to avert complete disaster. He escaped with his loyal adherents and a long procession of refugees who refused to abandon their fallen lord. Zhuge Liang proposed the unthinkable. Liu Bei and Sun Quan had been rivals and occasional enemies, their ambitions often colliding along shared borders. Yet facing the overwhelming force of Cao Cao's war machine, they understood that old grievances must be set aside. They stood a better chance united than isolated. Their meeting marked a tentative alliance steeped in tense diplomacy, practiced by desperate men when survival was at stake. Sun Quan commanded a fleet of experienced river fighters, men familiar with the treacherous currents of the Yangtze, while Liu brought with him the nobility of imperial lineage and the fierce loyalty of his followers determined to restore the Han dynasty. Together, they represented a fraction of Cao Cao's overwhelming numbers. But they held the advantage of intimate knowledge of the battlefield. The combined southern forces amounted to approximately 50,000 men, a meager count compared to Cao Cao, a seemingly invincible host. On paper, it appeared to be a recipe for massacre, as Cao Cao commanded not only superior numbers, but also the wealthiest territories in China. His soldiers were veterans, seasoned by countless battles and victories. While his reputation often sent lesser men fleeing before engagement, yet the canvas of war told only part of the tale. The Yangtze River was about to become the stage for a chess match where experience might outweigh the sheer size of an army, where understanding the battlefield could eclipse raw military strength, and where the greatest vulnerabilities could lie hidden beneath a facade of invincibility. As Cao Cao's massive fleet maneuvered down the river with vessels chained together for stability, bolstering his troops who suffered from seasickness, he must have savored the intoxicating certainty of imminent victory. The southern rebels would be annihilated, their territories absorbed into his expanding empire, fulfilling his vision of a unified China beneath his rule. Unbeknownst to him, however, his adversaries had already been devising a weapon capable of transforming his assets into a perilous liability. Thus, the stage was set for one of the most remarkable reversals in military history. On one side was Cao Cao's formidable naval force, unmatched in scale and commanded by a general who had never encountered true setbacks. On the other stood a desperate alliance forged from necessity. Members armed with nothing but cunning and the intimate knowledge of the river that would soon shape their destiny. The autumn winds began to shift, carrying with them both promises of fiery conflict and the seeds of an empire's demise. The southern commanders convened in clandestine councils along the riverbanks, their countenances grim as scouts delivered word of the advancing armada. Xiao Yu, Sun Quan's most trusted admiral, scrutinized the reports with an analytical eye honed by years spent navigating the treacherous waters of the southern rivers. The figures were astonishing, regardless of whether Cao's claims of 800,000 were inflated. The reality remained grim. At least 200,000 soldiers, perhaps more, crowded aboard ships stretching from bank to bank, resembling a veritable forest of masts and banners. Yet Zhao, you possessed a reputation for resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. He had survived in perilous waters where a single error could spell catastrophe. As he absorbed the intelligence circulating through his network of spies, a plan began to crystallize in his mind, a risky, daring strategy, necessitating impeccable timing. It was, however, their only hope. As the initial reports of Cao Cao's tactical decision filtered through, a grim smile broke across Xiao Yu's face. Recognizing that his land-hardened troops were suffering intensely from seasickness, the northern commander had ordered his ships to be chained together. A makeshift solution designed to stabilize his vessels and allow his soldiers to engage as if on solid ground. It was an innovative tactic, one that highlighted Cao Cao's military ingenuity, but simultaneously laid bare his vulnerabilities. Word reached the Southern Alliance swiftly, and Huanggai, one of Sun Quan's most seasoned generals, volunteered for what everyone could sense might be a suicide mission. The plan was deceptively simple, yet daunting in execution. Huanggai would compose a letter to Cao Cao, fabricating a narrative of disillusionment with Sun Quan's leadership, expressing his desire to defect alongside his ships and soldiers. This sort of defection was not unheard of amidst the chaos of these times, and Cao Cao's ever-present hunger for reinforcement would likely entice him to embrace the supposed ally. However, the ships that Huanggai would navigate across the water would not be manned by soldiers. Instead, their holds would be laden with bundles of dry kindling, barrels of oil, and other materials poised to ignite with ferocity. These vessels would be repurposed as fireships, designed to metamorphose Cao Cao's chained fleet from a strategic advantage into an explosive pitfall. Meticulous preparations ensued under the cloak of night. Huanggai's men hollowed out their ships' interiors, filling them with incendiary materials reeds from the riverbanks. Scrap wood from nearby ruins and stocks of lamp oil were carefully arranged to maximize the inferno's potential.
All the vessels needed
To maintain a facade of normalcy, their sails had to bear authentic banners, and their decks had to exhibit signs of customary activity, concealing the deadly transformation beneath. Concurrently, Zhuge Liu Bei's master strategist, devoted himself to studying the wind patterns with the precision of a scholar poring over ancient texts. Everything hinged on the wind. For the fireships to fulfill their deadly promise, a robust southeastern breeze was necessary to propel them directly into Cao's fleet and fan the flames once chaos erupted. Many days had passed with unfavorable winds blowing from the north, stubbornly stagnant or frustratingly calm. Yet Zhuge Liang, having spent years analyzing the seasonal variations of the Yangtze Valley, was aware that the autumn monsoon would eventually shift. As Cao Cao's fleet drew closer to the Allied position, tension mounted unbearably in the southern camps. Soldiers sharpened their weapons and inspected their armor, acutely aware that failure of the fireship assault would obligate them to confront an overwhelmingly powerful adversary on a battlefield stacked against them. Officers conferred quietly about fallback positions and retreat routes, preemptively strategizing for a defeat that loomed ominously on the horizon. The night before the attack, Huanggai made his final preparations. His letter to Cao Cao had been delivered and accepted. The northern commander, swayed by the general's fabricated claims of discontent, had arranged for a meeting under the cover of darkness to finalize the defection. It was an ideal setup, contingent on the wind behaving and their enemy's suspicion remaining dormant. In Cao Cao's camp, confidence reigned supreme. The warlord had acknowledged Huanggai's message, and after consulting his advisors, he opted to accept the defector and his ships, viewing them as valuable additions to his force. The psychological victory of gaining a high-ranking southern officer while simultaneously undermining Liu Bei would be nothing short of priceless. Orders spread among the ranks to organize a celebratory reception for the anticipated new ally, complete with feasts and festivities to commemorate the transfer of allegiance. The irony was palpable: Cao's illustrious success, his reputation cultivated through triumphs, and his aptitude for attracting defectors would soon be employed against him. His enemies understood him so well, they were willing to exploit his strengths as much as they leveraged his weaknesses, transforming his confidence into perilous complacency and his generosity into a gaping vulnerability. As the sun set on what would become the last tranquil night for Cao Cao's ambitions, both factions undertook their final preparations. In the south, fireships nestled into position while skeleton crews received their desperate orders. They would drive their vessels into the heart of the enemy fleet, igniting the fires at the precise moment to ensure maximum devastation, then absconding to safety in smaller boats. In the north, soldiers polished their weapons, their fantasies filled with visions of easy victories to come. Many penned letters home, recounting the imminent treasures and glory awaiting them. The chained ships swayed gently in the current, offering reassurance to men who had fought through sickness and longing for home. The stage was heightened for an encounter fated to echo through the annals of Chinese history. One side stood poised with the largest military assembly ever witnessed on Chinese waters, led by a commander untested in defeat. Across the way awaited a desperate coalition, armed solely with ingenuity, local wisdom, and a supremely risky plan that even its architects doubted could succeed. The winds were beginning to rise. Dawn broke over the Yangtze River with an air of deceptive calm, a morning mist unfurling from the water like the breath of sleeping dragons. Yet beneath that serene veneer, the currents of history had already begun to shift. Huanggai stood on the deck of his flagship, eyeing the rustling wind vanes as they danced in a strengthening breeze. The southeastern wind had finally arrived, just as Zhuge had foreseen it would. It became clear that the gods of war had chosen their champions. Across the water, Cao Cao's vast fleet lay anchored like a city forged upon the waves. An armada that stretched for miles, its masts creating a veritable forest of wood and rope that obscured portions of the sky. Colors fluttered in the swelling wind, displaying the emblems of vanquished territories and the insignia of champions who had never tasted the bitterness of defeatist sight, bred to instill unshakable terror in any foe. A showcase of power so overwhelming that it rendered any thought of resistance not just hopeless but sheer folly. However, Huanggai felt no fear as he stared down this looming vessel of doom. Instead, he perceived opportunity in every iron chain binding ship to ship, in the chasms between vessels where flames could easily lick and spread, and in the very banners that would soon serve as kindling for an inferno unparalleled in history. The Yangtze River was primed to forge a new path in the annals of time, where expectations of grandeur could swiftly fall to ashes, and the seeds of destiny could take root in the soil of uncertainty. Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to support our work and never miss an upload. Like this video, drop a comment, and share it with others to show your support and help us grow this historical community.